Hi, I'm Bill DiGiulio. Today I'd like to talk about technique. One of the great things about the internet and YouTube and other various platforms is that it's very easy to go on there and find guitarists and other instrumentalists too with amazing blazing technique. You see a lot of, especially metal players and some jazz players as well, playing amazing lines and amazing phrases that are quite impressive. So I want to talk about how to at least start to approach the concept of technique if you are a beginning or intermediate player. First step is, if you're an absolute beginner, keep in mind that speed is not necessarily your first priority. Speed, technique, and by definition, is really just the ability to play what you want to say on the instrument, okay, to create musically what you want, what you're hearing. So actually to do that does not always require speed. It requires quite a bit of control and other things, which I'll talk about in a second. So I would say if you're a beginning player, speed would not be your first priority. So let's talk about what speed actually is, or the components of it, first of all. Okay, first of all, the thing you want to develop is coordination, and that's coordination between your fingers and between the left and right hands. Flexibility, there has to be enough control in the hand, in both hands really, to accomplish what you want to accomplish. Efficiency, which is not having to work too hard to get a certain result. That's extremely important, especially when wanting to play fast, because we have to work within the limits of the human body. We don't want to stress the muscles, joints, tendons, etc. Okay? And thirdly, or I should say fourth, would be strength. Some degree of muscular strength in the hands is required, but as I'll explain in a second, that's one of the last things you'll develop, and it's one of the last things you need. You won't need a lot of strength in the beginning, so I would strongly advise against using hand grips or hand exercisers to try to build up hand strength. Playing should be enough of the physical exercise you need if you do it correctly, without resorting to specific hand gripping or finger independence kinds of things. And there are a lot of contraptions out there that supposedly build finger independence. I would avoid those, at least in the beginning, unless you really have a strong idea of what you want to do physically and possibly are working with a physical therapist. Because the last thing you want to do, of course, as a musician is do any damage or tire your hands prematurely. Now, the muscles will get tired to some degree when you're playing, but once they get a little fatigued, you want to stop and allow the muscle to rebuild itself. And then the next day or whenever you practice next, then maybe stress the muscle a little bit or the tendons a little bit, just to build gradually the amount of strength you need. Now, first of all, for beginners, here are some tips. Let's say you're just starting out with the guitar. Here are some ideas. First, make your guitar as easy to play physically as you can. That would involve a couple things. First of all, use light strings, like an 8 or a 9 on top, okay? And lower your action. If you're not an experienced player or you don't know how to do this, either take your guitar to a guitar repair person, guitar tech, and ask them to adjust the neck and lower the action to where the guitar is easier to play. Now, if you're not dealing with a super expensive instrument, you'll have to have the action down fairly low to get a good sound, or to be able to play it without stressing your hand. Even if that involves a little bit of buzzing, especially on budget guitars, the neck may not be straight, the frets won't be properly crowned and polished, so there will be some buzzing involved. So if you have to sacrifice tone in the beginning to get a playable guitar, you may have to do that. Especially with acoustic guitars, you may find that as well. Another tip which would help is using a capo. when you're first building speed or technique, one of the things you don't want to do is try to do excessive stretching with the hand. Flexibility will come with time as you get playing. And it's a necessary component, of course, but I would avoid excessive stretching of the hand in the very beginning until the muscles get more developed. That would be one of the last things you want to develop as far as technique. So how do we deal with that? Because when most people start the guitar, they start here in the open position of the first or second fret. And unfortunately, here the distance between the frets is the greatest, which require, for good tone, the most stretching. So to avoid that, we can do exercises up on the higher frets, or even if you're practicing reading, for example, maybe capo the 5th or even 7th fret and practice your reading up in the higher frets. This way you don't have to stretch large amounts to get a decent sound. Because keep in mind, to get the best tone with the most efficiency, we want to play as close to the fret as possible. We don't aim for the middle of the fret, of course. We aim for just behind the fret. So notice if I'm playing down here, that would mean stretching all the way up here. So to make it easier, we can do exercises and drills on the higher frets, or any kind of sight reading we're doing, do it on the higher frets first, and then gradually work our way down as our hand gets more experienced. Okay, so another thing to do is keep in mind, if you do any kinds of drills or exercises, to be efficient with your technique. So what I mean by that is, try not playing any louder or pressing harder with the left hand than you need to get a decent tone. Many times if you're not used to playing with a good instrument, people develop a poor habit, which is trying to play by playing louder. If they don't have a good amp, for example, they tend to pick harder than normal and press on the fret harder than normal. What that will do is put tension in the muscle and slow you down. So I would suggest in the beginning, if you do any kind of drills or exercises, to at least in the beginning, start doing them very lightly and picking very gently using a minimum of motion to get a decent sound. So this way you're playing very efficiently. Because to play really fast, it's hard to play very fast and very loudly. So we sacrifice volume and a lot of strength to get the flexibility and the coordination in the beginning. Okay, so for example, if I'm playing a simple major scale, for example, I'll pick very lightly and use as little motion in the left hand as I can get away with. As you'll notice, one of the things that beginners tend to do is to use too much motion in the left hand. Okay, they'll lift the fingers way too high. Now, some lifting, of course, is going to be happening. You don't want to try to lock your fingers down, but we try to minimize it for the use of efficiency. So if I'm playing a simple major scale, for example, I'll pick very gently. So notice I'm not stressing the hand at all. I'm using very little motion. And again, now this may not sound very impressive in the beginning, but to play very slowly with control and very legato as I just played takes a decent amount of technique actually. Right? So in the beginning, I would recommend listening very closely to what you're playing, because another key is to technique. You can only play as well or as much technique as you can hear. If you don't have developed ears, you're going to be playing and hearing a lot of problems and not realize it. So the best way to practice that is listen very closely. And if you're playing scales or exercises of any kind, for example, if you're doing scales and thirds, for example, you want to play as legato as possible for the best technique. A lot of people tend to play very detached, but try to play legato without letting the notes run over. For example, again, notice one of the keys to technique is play, as I said, on the far part of the fret, close to the fret itself, not in the middle of the fret, and use only as much pressure as you need. Squeezing hard will not necessarily help you get a better tone. Okay? Now, next step is to listen for coordination. The left and right hands have to be perfectly coordinated to get a good sound. If the finger hits before the pick, it'll block out the note. For example, okay, notice I got a false attack there. Okay, or if the pick hits before the finger, obviously it's not going to work either. We have a hammer on. So the idea is to time the left and the right hand so that you get a really clear attack exactly when you want it. And that may mean playing very slowly at first, and that's perfectly fine. Okay, a couple other things I'll mention. Keep in mind, using the tips of the fingers will focus the strength of the hand on exactly where you want it to be. By playing on the pads of the fingers, you'll find you'll have to play stronger or press harder to get a better sound. And also, you'll be touching other strings possibly by using the sides of the fingers. It's a little more challenging using the tips of the fingers to play, but it focuses the energy onto exactly where we want it to be. Another one is, of course, start from the beginning using the fourth finger. A lot of people tend to play, especially in the beginning, playing rock pentatonic things, they tend to strengthen only fingers 1 and 3 and maybe 2. Okay, so I would recommend playing scales and exercises and arpeggios that involve the fourth finger so you get used to using it. It may never get as strong as your first or second finger, but it needs to be strong enough so you could play what you need to play and have it come off cleanly. Okay, so, and keep in mind too, complete independence of the third and fourth finger for most people is not possible because the third and fourth finger are connected by a common tendon. So being able to lift the third finger completely is not even recommended as a great idea. So keep in mind, by keeping the fingers fairly close to the fingerboard, we don't have to worry about lifting the fingers very highly and stressing that common tendon there. Okay, that will tire out your hand as well. Now, a couple things to keep in mind too. The lifting of the fingers, not only the attack of the finger when playing the string is important as well. Notice, for example, if I'm doing a descending chromatic scale, for example, ascending is no problem because the attack of the fingers is usually fairly more accurate. Like if I'm playing ascending, now when I go to do the descending, I have to lift the finger very precisely too, which requires using different muscles. Now notice right there, perfect example. The finger didn't lift fast enough, so it created a bad note. So here again, notice that's a different set of muscles, so we want to build coordination in with the lifting of the fingers as well as the attack. So by listening closely, you can hear if you're playing legato and not hammering on notes or getting poor attacks. Now with the right hand again, one of the keys is playing very lightly. That'll do two things. First of all, it'll make your right hand more efficient if you're doing alternate picking. And secondly, it'll not require your left hand to play harder. If I'm picking hard with the right hand, I'll have to press harder with the left hand to get the same amount of tone. So by playing lightly with the right hand, I can relax the left hand and not have to press as hard, which will make it easier to get a little more speed built up. Okay, so that's adding into the efficiency of your playing. Now, a couple actual examples I'll demonstrate. One good way to start to build a little bit of coordination between the left and right hand is by using 16th note patterns. That could mean dotted patterns like this, for example. And you could do these with a metronome as well. I won't do them with a metronome now, but by playing something like a pattern like this and then reversing it. I'll do a simple major scale, but using a dotted 8th 16th pattern. That would be one example. Now I'll reverse the pattern. I'll do a 16th dotted 8th. And I can also do that by picking all the 16th notes like this. I'll do consistent down up. And I'll reverse it. So notice again, this requires precise lifting as well as pressing of the fingers, which is crucial for proper technique. Now another thing to keep in mind is by practicing over a long period of time and not stressing out the hand, we build endurance. So endurance is not necessarily playing super hard and super heavy. By playing a longer period of time, playing just at a moderate to soft volume and not necessarily difficult scales or arpeggio patterns, we can start to build endurance. This is where patience is really key. We want to have phenomenal technique tomorrow. I get that, of course. But by taking your time, you can slowly build your technique and not have to worry about developing hand issues. Because keep in mind, most times hand issues are caused by practicing way too long with too much strain in the hand. So the combination of both is really dangerous. So practice shorter periods of times, shorter time periods, of course, and have maybe 2 practice sessions if you're building technique, maybe a morning and an afternoon. And then keeping in mind not to play with too much tension in the hand. Only use as much force as you need to get the sound you want. So those are some basic ideas as far as technique. Now, one other one I'll mention is, as far as the right hand goes, efficiency here counts as well. I've been mainly talking about the left hand. In the right hand, by using just a small motion of the pick, notice I'm not doing, okay, I'm very closely monitoring how much motion I'm doing in the right hand. Now, there's lots of schools of thought about how to hold the pick, which I won't get into. Some people use 2 fingers, 3 fingers, the tip of the thumb, side of the thumb, all arm, all wrist. I'm not going to get into that now. But the idea is, in the beginning, try to keep your motion as efficient as possible and use only as much force in the hand, or I shouldn't say force, but slight amount of tension to create the sound you need. Notice if I use too little motion, the sound's very indistinct. But if I grip the pick just enough and use just enough tension, I get a good sound without putting too much strain on the hand. And then I can play for longer periods of time without any issue. So that should get you started as far as technique. If you have any specific questions, any issues, feel free to put them in the comments. And it's great to hear comments and suggestions. It gives me an idea of what direction to take the channel. So it's very helpful to me. Any kind of comments, criticisms, questions, feel free to put them in the comments below the video. And as I've said many times before, but your support is really helpful in this channel, so please like and subscribe to the channel if you are enjoying the videos, and please share them on social media. Again, my name is Bill DiGiulio. Thanks very much for watching.